Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks so much for joining with us. Every once in a while, a news story goes across the screen, and I look at it and go, you've got to be kidding me. The uproar over a major security breach is rocking Washington. Top administration officials discussed a military operation on an unsecured group chat that included a reporter.
Well, the chat revealed details of the bombing operation against the Houthis in Yemen days before it took place. Senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has more.
The White House said Vice President J.D. Vance and key members of President Trump's national security team discussed those highly sensitive military plans through the messaging app Signal. Also on that thread, a journalist.
Jeffrey Goldberg, an editor at The Atlantic magazine, wrote Monday that he was mistakenly added to the text chat on the commercial messaging app by Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, allowing him to follow the conversation in the 2 days leading up to the strikes in Yemen.
At 11:44 a.m., I receive a text in this chain from someone who claims to be Pete Hegseth, who provides what I can only call a war plan. I sort of wait with my phone to see if this is a real thing. Sure enough, around 1:50 Eastern time, I see that Yemen is under attack.
A spokesman for the White House Security Council said the thread appears to be authentic and officials are reviewing the matter.
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
The text chain also included VP Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. The text included an exchange between Vice President Vance and Hegseth, Vance criticizing the attacks because he felt it sent the wrong signal to Europe, who he believes should be picking up more of the military burden. Hegseth backed the plan, but expressed disgust over what he called European freeloading. Goldberg withheld some screenshots in his reporting, saying they could further risk national security, and that Hegseth shared operational details of forthcoming strikes, weapons deployments, and attack sequencing.
I'm not going to characterize what happened. Clearly, I think the administration has acknowledged it was a mistake, and they'll tighten up and make sure it doesn't happen again.
While some lawmakers are calling for a full investigation, others question the significance of the breach.
This is gross negligence on steroids. Do they realize that Russia and China have targeted Signal to try to break in? Somebody made a mistake, and that happens.
President Trump denied any knowledge of the incident, suggesting the attack was still successful.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
This morning, calls reportedly are growing for Mike Waltz to be forced out. Later today, National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe can expect tough questions in a hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee. In Washington, Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Well, it is a you've got to be kidding me story. And why would national security officials, the Defense Department, be using a commercial chat room to do this? They have to recognize that every government has targeted, and whether it's WhatsApp or all the other supposedly secure messaging systems, they've all tried to crack them so that they can track what their own citizens are doing on the internet, and to somehow have these kinds of conversations, it just is truly mind-boggling. Why in the world doesn't our own Pentagon have its own secure messaging app and keep that off the grid and have end-to-end encryption? You just wonder, what in the world are we doing? Well, in other news, the Trump administration is taking a new direction in its battle with a federal judge over the deportation of Venezuelan nationals. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. President Trump is invoking a state secret privilege and refusing to provide any additional information to the D.C. District Court judge. Meanwhile, a three-member appeals court heard arguments Monday in a high-profile case. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has the latest.
Citing the Alien Enemies Act, an 18th century wartime law, the Trump administration recently deported hundreds of alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador. As the planes made the trip, a federal judge ruled against the move. Still, the administration continued on with deportations, setting up this latest showdown.
What was done by the Trump administration was exactly in accordance with federal law, again, enacted by Congress and signed by the president. We're not making this up. We're enforcing laws around the books.
Judge James Boasberg ruled the Venezuelans deserved a court hearing before their deportations to determine whether they belong to the violent Tren de Aragua gang. He's warned the Trump administration of consequences if evidence shows officials deliberately disobeyed his order. Trump and certain cabinet members now ramping up attacks, calling for Judge Boasberg to be impeached or disbarred.
This is an out-of-control judge, a federal judge trying to control our entire foreign policy, and he cannot do it.
The Trump administration wants Boasberg's order reversed. The three appellate judges seem divided after Monday's hearing, with one appearing open to the administration's argument, another remaining silent, and a third says alleged Nazis in the U.S. during World War II were treated better than the Venezuelan immigrants.
People weren't given notice. They weren't told where they were going. Those people on those planes on that Saturday had no opportunity to file habeas or any type of action to challenge the removal.
They say a judgment will be issued in the coming days, but Bondi believes the Supreme Court will likely get the case.
The Alien Enemies Act applies today really more than ever. You know, old law is often the best law if you think about how the laws that have been on the books for a very long time. We are in modern day warfare. They have invaded our country, TDA, Tren de Agua. They are organized. They have a command structure. They are sending money to each other throughout the country and out of the country back to support their terrorist actions.
The Trump administration plans to continue arresting people as this plays out in court. And DHS Secretary Kristi Noem is scheduled to visit Central America this week, including the El Salvador prison housing those Venezuelan migrants.
We're going to keep targeting the worst of the worst, which we've been doing since day one, and deporting from the United States to the various laws on the book.
President Trump also announced a 25% tariff on any country that purchases oil and/or gas from Venezuela and then pursues trade with the United States. Writing on Truth Social, the president says this is in response to Venezuela purposefully sending Tren de Aragua gang members to the U.S. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Caitlin. The Supreme Court heard arguments yesterday over a Louisiana voting rights case that could have national implications. It deals with how states use race to determine congressional maps. After the 2020 census, state redistricting left Louisiana with just one majority African-American district, even though about a third of the state's population is black. Civil rights groups sued and gained a second majority black district. That triggered a counter lawsuit claiming race was a main determination in how districts were drawn. An appeals court agreed, leaving lawyers for the state to seek the Supreme Court for its opinion.
We'd rather not be caught between two parties with diametrically opposed visions of what our congressional map should look like. But this has become life as usual for the states under this court's voting cases. And our fundamental question today is, how do we get out of this predicament?
While waiting for the justice to hear the case, the newly drawn map with two black districts remained in place for the 2024 election, sending two African-American Louisiana representatives to Washington for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Well, now to the war in Israel. Houthi rebels in Yemen fired another missile at Israel yesterday, while in Gaza, Hamas released another hostage propaganda video, all as the IDF continues to hunt down the terror group's leaders. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
Sirens wailed throughout south and central Israel as another Houthi missile sent people into bomb shelters. Israel successfully intercepted the missile. To stop those missiles, the U.S. is continuing its daily campaign to eliminate the threat by the Houthis against Israel and global shipping in the Red Sea. The U.S. says a key Houthi leader has been eliminated. In Gaza, Israel's ground operation is widening. The IDF also eliminated a major Hamas leader. Israel also destroyed more than 100 white pickup trucks throughout Gaza. Hamas terrorists used those trucks in their massacre on October 7th. In the UK, a joint commission of British parliamentarians released a landmark report about October 7th. It concluded, the atrocities committed by Hamas and allied groups on 7 October marked a day of unprecedented violence. There are numerous accounts of deliberate killings, hostage abuse, sexual violence, and desecration of both the living and the dead. The goal behind the report is to combat denial of what happened on October 7th, just like some people deny the Holocaust. During a stalemate in hostage negotiations, Hamas released another propaganda video. It shows two Israelis pleading with another hostage who was freed to speak out about how hard the conditions are in captivity. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff says he blames Hamas for the collapse of the hostage talks. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar says there is a way the war can end immediately.
The war can end tomorrow with releasing our hostages, the demilitarization of Gaza, and the withdrawal of the armed Hamas and Islamic Jihad forces from there. War is not an ideology. We would be happy, and we will be happy, to achieve our aims by diplomatic means. But if that is not possible, we have no choice but continuing our military efforts.
Israeli media is reporting Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer will lead a delegation to Washington in the coming days. He will urge the Trump administration to set a timetable on President Trump's maximum economic pressure campaign on Iran to end its nuclear weapons program. Israel expects once an agreed time period expires, alternative decisions would be made, presumably a military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
All right, thank you, Chris. Gordon, back over to you.
Well, these are certainly interesting days in that sort of, Chinese proverb. Some call it a curse, some call it something wonderful. May you live in interesting times. We certainly are. And whether you look at Ukraine and the reframing of that war and the escalation by Russia at the same time, they're telling our administration, oh, we're ready for peace. We want to sit down for peace talks. But then they go and attack the capital of Ukraine. It just, you go, what in the world's going on? Here you have the Houthis. They're firing missiles at our ally, Israel. They're also firing against our own naval ships. But then you hear, and if this Chatgate messages are accurate, you're hearing our own vice president say, well, we shouldn't do it because we're bailing out Europe, and Europe depends more on the Suez Canal than we do, and if they want to keep that open, they need to, pay their fair share of the military burden. But both cases ignore the real things that are happening on the ground, and you literally can't. As citizens are being killed in Ukraine, you can't try to justify the Russian invasion. At the same time as the Houthis are firing against our own naval vessels, it is high time for us to respond. And I do applaud the president for taking a tough stand here. He definitely has overruled his vice president. No, we're going after the Houthis. We're going after all the proxies of Iran, and we're also going after Iran. Let's name the reality on the ground for what it is. Iran is the largest sponsor of terrorism, state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And let's hold them accountable for these horrible attacks against Israel, the threats they have against us, against Europe, and let's say no. In the world today, you don't get to have a nuclear weapon. You don't get to be a state sponsor of terrorism and get away with it. You don't get to shut down shipping. You don't get to do these things. And you don't get to hold Israel hostage by threatening them with nuclear war. This won't happen on our watch, and we need to make sure that everyone in the administration and everyone in Congress understands our resolve, that we stand with Israel, we stand against Iran, we stand against Qatar and its funding of Hamas. These things should not happen under our watch.